Hi and welcome back to the Snapshot Situation. I'm Gaston and today we're going to dive into the soft and saturated world of Saul Leiter, a pioneer in colour photography who made his mark with his unique approach. I'll be using a Nikon FA and a 105mm lens to try and emulate his unique style. It's not a classic Saul Leiter camera, but he used various cameras throughout his life, so feel free to use whatever you prefer. Saul Leiter was born in Pittsburgh in 1923, and he was originally destined to become a rabbi like his father. But he had other plans, and eventually he moved to New York to pursue his passions in photography and painting. His work was characterized by the use of layers, negative space and selective focus to create distinctive images. He had a careful eye for composition, and he was known to use expired film for its shifted colors and cheaper price. Let's break down the key elements of his style and see how we can incorporate them into our street photography. First up, capturing candid moments. Saul Leiter's work was marked by his observational skills, capturing beauty in everyday moments. He once said, "I don't have a philosophy, I have a camera." Saul Leiter had a great ability to capture emotions and tell stories through his photographs. To emulate this, try to be discreet and unobtrusive when photographing people. Keep your camera ready and be patient as you wait for the right elements to align. Street photography is about observing and reacting to the world around you, so stay open and alert to the unexpected. Leiter is quoted as saying, "Photography is about finding things." So let's find some beautiful moments. Next up is embracing weather and seasons. Leiter was known to make the most out of various seasons and weather conditions, using them to add mood and atmosphere to his images. He wasn't one to be locked up inside during a blizzard. That's dedication. Don't be afraid to venture out on snowy or rainy days, as these are conditions that can create beautiful reflections, textures, and contrast in your photos. Embrace the changing seasons and explore how different lighting and different colors of the seasons can impact your street photography. Leiter was a master at using foreground elements to create depth in his images. Often he would shoot through windows, mirrors, or even crowds of people to add a sense of intrigue and layering in his images. Experiment with reflections, silhouettes, and different angles to capture that Leiter magic. Moving on to negative space and composition. Saul Leiter had an incredible ability to balance his photos with the right amount of negative space. This leaves breathing room for the eye to wander around the image and lets you focus on the subject. For those new to photography, negative space often refers to the empty or unoccupied areas in an image that helps balance composition. So when you're out on the streets, pay attention to the balance of the frame, look for interesting shapes, lines and texture that can enhance your composition, and use that negative space to create a more dynamic photo. Don't always leave the subject in the middle of the frame, and try to think about ways that you can make the composition more dynamic. Next up is selective focus. Leiter was known for his use of shallow depth of field, which made the main subject of his image stand out. Shallow depth of field means that only a small amount of the image is in focus. With the 105 2.5 that I'll use later on today, I think I can achieve this effect. When you're out shooting, look for moments where you can isolate your subject, whether that's a person, an object, or even just an interesting texture. Sometimes Leiter will focus on something unexpected and let the obvious subject fall out of focus. Experiment with different aperture settings and distances from your subject to see how it impacts the mood and composition of your image. Saul Leiter was famous for his vibrant colors, often achieved by using expired slide film. Using expired film is still an option today, but remember you will have more unpredictable results. If you're going for full authenticity, pick a low-speed slide film, as most color slide film back in the day had low sensitivity. If you're shooting digitally, consider tweaking your color settings in camera or applying color filters in post-processing. Also, pay careful attention to the light conditions. Early day and late evening night will have a lower angle and help you emphasize colors in a dramatic way. Finally, look for colorful subjects or backgrounds that will help enhance the overall color palette of your image. Saul Leiter would often include abstract elements in his photographs, which would create a sense of intrigue and mystery. Try to look for interesting patterns, shapes and forms that can add a unique character to your image. Experiment with different elements and try to challenge yourself to see beyond the obvious subjects. Here I think that Leiter's background as a painter was very influential in helping him visualize the streets in a different way. If you don't dabble in other visual arts like painting and drawing, make sure to keep an open mind and watch exhibitions and works by all kinds of artists, not just photographers. Sometimes Saul Leiter would use long lenses to create a sense of compression and abstraction in his images. This technique can help you emphasize your subject and create a more distant, detached feeling. With the 105 lens I will try today, I can experiment with this effect by focusing on subjects that are further away. Play around with different distances and see how it impacts your photos and the feeling of perspective in the photography. Another thing we can learn from Saul Leiter is the importance of putting in the time and being consistent. The more time you spend on the streets, the more opportunities you'll have to capture unique moments and compelling images. So put yourself out there, wander, observe, and immerse yourself in the world around you. And remember, practice makes perfect, or as I like to say, practice makes less terrible. Saul Leiter's later in life discovery allowed him to gain the perspective to have a better understanding of his own body of work. While we can't wait decades to review our own photographs, the process of developing and scanning films gives us some necessary distance. If you're shooting digitally, consider waiting a while before reviewing your images on the screen to gain a bit of perspective. It's like marinating your photos. The flavors come out better after some time. Here I'm using subframing by putting the subjects within the door frame. Unfortunately, I think it would have been more interesting if the subjects had been in focus. Here I'm using the same subframing technique, but I'm focusing on the dirty phone booth glass. It's not a bad shot, but it would have been better if I had waited a bit longer for a more interesting silhouette behind the glass. For this photo I'm using foreground elements to add layering to the image. I really like this shot. I think the foreground element really adds a lot, and it's got a good mix of people and more abstract shapes. Saul Leiter has made quite a few famous car photos with reflections on the cars, but this one needs a brighter element of colour. This shot could have been quite good, I think, but I underexposed and you can't see the waiter inside the restaurant. I really like this picture. I think it's got a good depth and complexity of elements. If I was to improve it, I would place the subject on either side of the middle of the frame. Right now it's a bit too central. It's not something you can see in Saul Leiter's photos, but I really like when subjects look at the camera. It's a shame there's some movement blur, because I think this one could have been quite good. This picture is not too bad, but it could have done with a person in the foreground to add a bit more perspective. I find reflection shots really hard to pre-visualize. They always come out different to what I had imagined. It's probably something you get better at with practice. These shots really have a Saul Leiter vibe to them, I think. All it needs is maybe a touch of color. I'm sorry for the overexposed image, I'm still trying to figure out things with the GoPro. This shot could have probably been better with a wider angle lens, so you could see the reflections from the streets. This is probably one of my favorite shots from the 2 days I took pictures. Here the depth of field really works. I'm not used to trying to shoot through things, but this shot through a bin is not too bad. This one is probably my favorite shot. It could have been better with a slightly wider angle lens, but it still comes together and the colors are really nice. These images are probably not the most interesting, but they're the ones that look the closest to a Saul Leiter image with the reflections and the colors. wonder if this shot would have been better if I focused on the background rather than the subject. I waited almost 5 minutes there to have someone with colourful clothing walk behind the windows, so it really demonstrates the idea that patience is important. There's always someone smoking in front of these big pillars, and I can never resist taking a picture. These reflection shots are probably some of the closest I've taken to a Saul Leiter picture. I quite like the second one.
Don't care when the badges at the door, then the brains off the floor, don't know anymore. I feel that.
This last picture is not amazing, but it shows that you can try and do this without taking pictures of people if you prefer. Alright folks, after giving it a shot, I have to confess that my photos don't really look like Saul Leiter's. Imitation is the most sincere form of flattery, but it's not really what I'm going for. The goal of this exercise was to step out of my comfort zone, take some inspiration from Saul Leiter's technique, and ultimately I think I managed to learn some valuable lessons. I became a bit more adventurous with my compositions. Instead of taking the photograph immediately and trying to make the subject as clear as possible, I started playing around with negative space and found myself composing images with a bit more thought. I tried to create imbalance and more dynamic images. Remember that while Saul Leiter's style is great and distinctive, it's not the only way to see the world. By trying to emulate him, I realized that I could borrow some elements without losing my identity as a photographer. I think that in conclusion, this exercise was a great learning experience. Sure, my photos didn't really turn out exactly like carbon copies of Saul Leiter, but that was never the point. The real value lies in pushing ourselves, trying new techniques, and sometimes even failing miserably, because that's where growth happens. And that's our journey into the world of Saul Leiter's street photography. I hope you enjoyed this adventure, and I can't wait to see the images that people will take as you apply these techniques to your own work. If you can find beauty in a puddle or a broken window, you're already half on your way to mastering Saul Leiter's style. I found this challenge really refreshing, so if you have suggestions of another photographer I could try and emulate, leave your suggestions down below. Thank you for joining me on today's Snapshot Situation episode. If you've enjoyed this video and found it helpful, leave a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more street photography videos. À bientôt!